Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is January 10, 2023. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. It's truly an honor and a pleasure to be here with Richie Morales. Richie, where in the heck you calling in from?
Suffern, New York.
Dude, what an honor to talk. What is the best thing for a human being?
What is the best thing for a human being? Having something in their life that gives them moments of peace, moments of serenity. Doesn't have to be art. Doesn't have to be music. Doesn't have to be. Could be anything.
Yeah.
Like they say that. What was that book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance?
Yeah.
I'm dating myself. I mean, I don't even think I ever read that book, but I just like the title.
Yeah. Dude, that's total super cool. Peace and serenity. What's your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
Well, I don't get a printed newspaper anymore. I don't know how many people do. Some people do. Reading probably. I don't watch. I don't watch any of the infotainment shows. Unless there's like a natural disaster happening or some catastrophe or something. I don't watch CNN or MSNBC or Fox or but I do read.
You're a smart man. Richie, did you grow up a reader because your parents told you to read? They did as an example or on your own?
Yeah, because they did it as an example. My dad was in my early years. He was in college. He was getting his BA, and then later he was getting his master's degree, and so there were always books in the house. I remember he had was it a biology book? I think it was biology. I couldn't read yet, but this biology book had pictures of prehistoric life. It had pictures of dinosaurs and fossils and things like that. And I couldn't read yet, but I just like looking at that book.
How cool. Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Well, some people want to know what's going on. Some people, I know a lot of people are amazingly ill-informed. Yeah. And they're blissful. They're, ignorance is bliss. Like they don't really know, or they know about pertinent issues, but only in the most superficial way. They don't really know the nuts and bolts of something that's going on, be it politics or something with the environment or.
Do you think that was good, Richie? Do you think this need or want to collect information is more innate in us or more invented by us?
Well, people have become TV. They're addicted to TV. They're addicted to the news outlets. And as a touring musician, which I was away from it for a really long time, and last year I went back on the road heavily for the first time in years. But guys, they go. The first thing they do is they go and they put CNN on.
Yeah.
I mean, most of the people I know put CNN. Maybe they might put on Fox. I don't know. But and then they wonder why they're depressed, and then they wonder why they're sad, why they're not feeling good,
Yeah.
because, well, you know, with Zappa, with Zappa, what was that? The torture never stops. Remember that song? Remember that?
Of course I do.
Oh no, the torture. There's the torture, and that I am the slime. I am the
I
slime.
Am the Slime is one of the greatest lyrically written pop songs ever. I agree. But it's funny because Frank went from I just discovered this whole epiphany about Frank and journalism, because in a Packard Goose, he says journalism, we should be wary of it. Then he's on Dinah Shore the same year, and he's saying, "What are you?" Dinah Shore asked him, "What are you?" And he says, "I'm a documentary reporter." So he's saying we should be weary of the profession I'm in, which is a good thing. It's a big picture, but I understand totally when people travel, whether they're on the road with a band, they go into a hotel and they turn on the TV the first thing, you know.
Yeah, that's if
It's
you know
like,
if you can get it, you know.
yeah.
And
But
also,
that was,
when you're in a foreign country, it's a way to connect with home. You know,
yeah,
if you don't speak the language,
yeah,
then you know you want to hear your own language. So that
yeah,
sometimes you have to do that. But
yeah. Well, we're going to get into what you just brought up in regards to music in a second. A few more basic background philosophical. Fill in the blank, Richie. I don't know what I think until I
try to get all sides of the story.
yeah,
You
that's good.
know, you know, the one side, you know, there's three, you know, they say three sides to every story, you
Yep.
know, yours,
No,
mine, and the truth. What really happened.
yeah, well, that's Robert Evans. He said there's three sides to every story: yours, mine, and the truth, and none of them are lying, because it's all about, you know. But
Right.
anyways, that was good. Can humans think without language?
Well, what's the definition of thinking? I mean, so much of there's instinctual responses, there's gut responses uh, to, to to stimuli. Is that thinking? I don't know.
Well, dude,
What?
you win. You win because this series is about inventing new questions. So you answered a question with a question. That's what I'm on. This is what it's all about with me.
Uh-huh. Well,
But
yeah.
yeah, no, that's fine. Chomsky says that a language is not just words, it's culture, tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. Richie, what do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
Well, it's best to withdraw. I mean, for that, to take a step back
Yeah,
and try to analyze what it is, you're dealing with.
yeah,
You know, like people get into an emotionally heated state, and they're not speaking rationally, or communicating rationally, or they're communicating out of anger or out of fear. You know, you have to step back. Uh, uh, you know, take a minute, like when they say, uh, you know, take a deep breath, and count to 10.
Richie, you're a wise man. I think conscious breathing is one of the healing forces of the universe. Your observations of humans in general, it's a stupid question. No, it's both. Are we more feeling beings or more thinking beings?
Uh, well, people are always thinking, how does this best serve my interests in their day-to-day dealings with other people, but so in that sense they're thinking. I'm sorry, repeat the question.
Are we more feeling beings or more thinking beings?
Well, I think emotions probably rule over rational thought, unless someone trains themselves to be analytical or what's really going on here. But how do we react to a gut situation? Be it some kind of an emergency or we're having
gut.
a debate. If we're debating someone, or over some issue, some political issue, which I have tried to avoid like the plague. But yes,
but your reference to gut is good, Richie, because see, this is what I'm after: is percept, gut, hunch, feeling. But most people answer that. Are we more feeling or thinking beings? 80% of people say we're more feeling beings. But you can't separate it. Feeling and thought are so intertwined. We think we can because we invented the words thinking and feeling. But my favorite is Bridget Bardot. She says, when I make love, I don't think. And I'm like, good luck. Like, how do you erase your brain from thinking? You're doing the most sensuous thing your body could do, probably, and then you're thinking. It's like, can you surrender to that full sensual experience?
Well,
anyways,
Sonny Rollins said you can't think and play at the same time.
Oh yeah.
And I was in a band with it was his band with the great Yankee baseball player Bernie Williams, and he's a great guitar player. And we were talking about what it's like to go up to to an at bat in a major league situation. When the guy's he's throwing a pitch, 100 miles an hour, and there's a lot of pressure. And if you think, you're done. He said you have to go up there with a blank mind. He said you have to be he didn't use these words, but essentially, you have to be in a zen, in a zone, and you you're reacting. So there's certain things you can't think. If you take the time to think, it's done. It's over. The moment's gone.
That's it. Really well put. These are two questions from Alan Turing, 1950s. Is thinking a function of the soul?
I don't know. There's anatomical parts of the body that are associated with how we feel. Our stomach, our heart. If something's heartfelt, if we're playing with a lot of heart, if, emotional, a cerebral approach to a solution. But then there's another school of thought that says it's all synapses and chemical reactions in our brain, electrical impulses and chemical reactions, and that's what makes us the way we are. So I don't know.
Yeah, but a little both. The second Turing question is, can machines think?
They're trying to get them to think. I mean, there's this whole thing with our AI. I saw an article the other day that's like they're making robots. There was that movie with Will Smith, I, Robot.
Yeah.
And there's a robot that's accused of murder.
Yeah.
So there was a article in the Times. I didn't read the article, but it's scientists are they want to give robots emotions, but is it a good idea?
Yeah.
But
But
yeah, when you were on social media, or you pick up your phone, and you're on some social media platform, and all of a sudden these ads are coming to you. They're tailoring your online experience. Or you may have just said a word, and the phone picked up on it. Next thing you know, there's
yeah.
some ad for some product that you were thinking about.
Yep. Oh, it happens all the time.
Yeah, so there are algorithms out there. They're trying to put so somebody's thinking, maybe it's the machine, maybe it's.
Yeah. The creator of the machine. Richie, do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
Well, the older I've gotten, I don't find a lot of meaning. in I pursue happiness. I mean, not to the end of, so not just blind, self gratification, but I just want to be in a good place. I have less time for. I don't have time for like they say, don't sweat the small stuff. I have less
Yeah.
time. I have less time for that.
Wise, very wise, Richie. Does the brain more detect consciousness or create consciousness? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're detecting it, or are we creating it?
Well, there's different levels of consciousness. Um, this is kind of not. I'm getting out of my depth here, but there are different levels of consciousness, and some people they're functioning on a low wavelength, and different wavelengths, and people are functioning on all these different ones. Um, I I don't know that they create that. I think they, through self development, education, spiritual development, whatever you want to call it, we arrive at these different levels. But I don't think we invented it. Uh,
What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
pff, I'm going to pass on that one.
Thank you. Um, Marshall McLuhan learned from the poet Ezra Pound that artists are the antenna of the race. Like artists, I mean drummers, composers, painters, poets. They're the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions. So, Richie, I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole 40-year career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Well, because art doesn't automatically. It's not supposed to always hit you in your pleasure centers.
Yeah.
Art takes you many different places, and some it could be unpleasant, could make you uneasy. Uh, People have certain religious beliefs that they get very upset or even angry or violent if these beliefs are challenged in any way.
Yeah.
So art can do all these things. It's not automatically a feel good type situation.
Rarely people really listen to the essence of that question, and I think you really understood. I appreciate it. The follow up is, do artists have moral obligation?
A moral obligation to do what?
See, again, you're answering with the question. Yeah, it's sort of like we don't know, but most people say, well, they have a moral obligation to themselves, or they have a moral obligation to everybody. But if art is
Well,
possibly good
most people,
challenge, yeah,
yeah,
go ahead.
most
Yeah,
artists have a compulsion.
yeah,
To create or to do
yeah,
whatever it is they do. They're compelled to do it.
yeah,
And musicians always say, a lot of my friends say, the music chose me. I didn't choose the
yeah,
music.
yeah,
Um, are we trying to put out good? There's enough negativity in the world. There's no shortage of
yeah,
negativity.
yeah.
We're on the verge of World War III. We're playing. It's here already, really. Um, we've got the diseases, the lockdown, all this negative stuff out there. So if an artist can um, through their creation, through their work, if they can provide relief or an alternative to that negativity, then that's great. Are they morally obligated to do that? I don't, I don't know. I don't know.
That's good. That's good. Let's move on because we're flying through these, and I really want to get to music. We're almost there. Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever, or one of them?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have some early memories when I was maybe a toddler or something. Um, Early years, but very often, if I look through old pictures, my mother is a great. She's still around. She's got a great collection of snapshots and pictures, and she's got pictures of early birthday parties or whatever. And sometimes I look at them and I remember everything. I remember the room. I don't always recognize all the people, but of course, I remember first musical experiences. I'm a percussionist, so my first experiences with being moved by percussion and drum music. I remember that. Yeah.
Well, let's go into that, Richie. Tell me someone within your immediate family, just briefly, and then outside your immediate family, who had an impact on you, kind of like a role model. And what specifically was that impact?
Well, my dad was a role model.
What did you mainly get from your dad, you think?
Well, he had a strong work ethic. He liked music. He had broad tastes musically. Um,
So now outside your immediate family, someone who had an impact on you, kind of like a role model.
well, I had an uncle through marriage, and he married my mother's sister. I come from a Puerto Rican family, but he wasn't. He was Italian, but he loved Latin music. He loved all kinds of music, but he liked Latin music, and he liked percussion. And then later on, he liked the music of the counterculture and everything. But anyway, he gave me my first pair of sticks and a practice pad when I was.
Nice.
So that was a big influence.
That was a big start. So a couple more and we're into music. Did your parents raise you a particular religion?
Um, well, it was kind of a mixed marriage, religion-wise. So I got some of the Presbyterian outlook, and I got some of the Catholic outlook. But I
Do
didn't
you
get. But I didn't get. the full, blast of either. You know what I mean?
Do you pray?
Would I call it praying? Praying, meditation. When I'm really playing into musicians are praying when they play sometimes. If you're really in the zone,
Yeah.
You're meditating, you're communicating on a higher level than just words and just playing notes. There's a certain I don't know about the word mystic. There's something going on with the communication when you develop a strong ensemble sensibility with other musicians.
Yeah.
There's something that goes on it's almost telepathic.
Yeah. I've seen you play and heard you, and I know I've heard that sort of ESP kind of communication. If God does exist, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
Well, I'd like him to say, "Nice work."
Cool. Richie, do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
Both.
Yep. It's actually the question really is how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And I set up with a few modern thinkers. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the Mob and the Samurai, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question, Richie, is how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Well, there is truth. There's truth to that. But it depends how much of a threat. Is it an existential threat? Is it actually a real threat of violence? Because that sort of thing you have to acknowledge directly. You have to confront it, because if you're confronted with a certain someone who's trying to hurt you or hurt your family, I mean, that has to be dealt with. You can't ignore them. You can't. I mean, you can, but you're going to end up you're going to get hurt. So
yeah.
So you have to situational awareness. You have to, the best thing, if you can, run away. So you have to acknowledge your enemy. You can't make believe. You can't put your head in the sand.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you can also be, if you're consumed with this hatred for someone because they're your enemy, quote unquote. I mean, it's like, what is that one? Holding a grudge is like drinking poison and thinking that it's going to make the other person sick.
Yeah.
It's
good. But it's interesting because it's like, how do we deal with it? This guy, Nassim Taleb, said games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, we don't really know who wins or loses, but you can tell who a hero is and who is not. So I told someone that, and they said, well, villains don't think they're bad. They want control. Heroes want freedom. And like Bateson said, the anthropologist said, when the criminal gets caught, do they go, oh, I did something morally or socially wrong? Or do they go, whoa, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day? So the bottom line question is, Richie, does punishment work?
Well, judging from the rates of what is the word? Recidivism.
Yeah.
In the prison system, I would say it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Because it's a revolving door. Or they let the people out. they don't function well in society. They get arrested, they go back in, or they've been institutionalized. They don't know how to function outside of the prison. But there are stories where people have
Yeah.
improved themselves and accomplished great things after they were incarcerated. And this is on a different topic, but with the American penal system, there were different phases of where it was focused on just punishment. Then the concept of rehabilitation through hard work, I think, is a relatively new concept in terms of the field of is it called penology? I don't know.
Yeah. Yep.
And I mean,
Well, it's a reform. That's a great attitude. James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He said, "This is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree?" Years later, Faulkner said, "Sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism." Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Well, people get caught up in the mundane and in the day-to-day of trying to, make ends meet, to support a family. And so maybe they lose track, or these tastes have to be cultivated anyway.
Yeah.
With the exposure at an early age, or wherever, why don't we just live life? I don't know. Well, there's different countries in different parts of the world, like in Italy, they know how to live.
Yeah.
In terms of the lifestyle, the pace, the food, the appreciation of fine things. As a practical matter, I mean, it's really hard to do business over there. It's when you're touring, it's you never quite know what's going to happen. It's not as bad as it used to be. France is another example. They get life. I mean, it's changing, but as opposed to Americans, people, the Americans work more hours than anybody per week, and they're just consumed with hours and putting in the thing, and maybe obsessed with their materialism. That's how the rest of the world looks at us.
But it's interesting, Rich, you said this work ethic from your dad, and I think most people our age, raised in America, baby boomers, got their work ethic from their parents. And you look up work ethic in Wikipedia, and about the third paragraph down, it says, this could be a scam from consumer capitalism culture. But, it seems as though what you first started with saying to me about finding peace and serenity. And at the same time, you've definitely had a work ethic. How did you come to realize that that your mission was to find peace and serenity, being a drummer, and still navigate the teachings of your dad, or how your dad raised you with a work ethic? Was there an epiphany?
Well, he was supportive, He was supportive of my music, He said, look, you can, if when it came time to go to college, he says, I'll support you as much as I can. I'm not wealthy, we're not a wealthy family. And he had other kids. But if you want to pursue this music, well, go ahead and do it, but you're on your own. And
but
and
there's
so
some...
then when times got really hard and I didn't really know what was going to go on business wise, gigs, work was non-existent, money was non-existent, and I was about to pack it in. And he said, just hang in there a little bit longer, He said, you've been waiting on the corner. We lived in Chicago. You've been waiting on the corner in the rain and the snow for the bus to come. And it's really late. The bus is nowhere in sight. And you're about to pack it in and start walking. And as soon as you do that, that bus is going to roll up.
Yeah.
So he said, just hang in there a little bit longer.
Yeah.
And so that was his way of being supportive.
But that's where we met 45 years ago at University of Michigan in Ann Arbor.
Yeah.
What my question is about what are you studying there, and where's your tipping point? Your Italian uncle is giving, supporting or buying you the drum pad. Where's your tipping point where you said, that's what I want to pursue? That's my life calling, being a musician. Where's your tipping point?
Well, I was fortunate in high school that I ran into some people, some rich kids, and they had good equipment, and they had and their dad was Ken Nordine of Word Jazz.
Hello.
And he had a studio in his house, and he had all this first-rate equipment, and so we used to jam over there and play all the time. And we would, after a while, he was doing a lot of jingles and voiceover work. That's how he made his, fortune. And he would record us, and then he would edit the jams and the vamps and whatever, and he would use them for jingles, and he would talk over them, and then we would get checks. We would get paid. We joined the union. It was a job, and I'm like,
at what age is that? Pre going to Ann Arbor?
Yeah. I was in high school. Probably I was about 16.
Dang, that's pretty good, dude.
Probably about 16. And
what did you study? What did you go to Ann Arbor to study? Did you study?
I was a liberal arts major. I was in a residential college. I was studying comparative literature.
You're kidding. That is heavy. I didn't know. So you didn't study music at U of M?
Well, no, I went to U of M, and I said, I went there. I just went to the music school, and I said, listen, I have some interest. I've been a professional musician, blah, blah, this and that and the other. And basically, they told me to get lost.
Oh, my God.
And they said, oh, well, you couldn't possibly be admitted here. Our students have been studying privately for years. And the thing is, and then I was in a band. I was in a band with Chris Brubeck. I was in New Heavenly Blue. All those guys were in the University of Michigan music school.
They were all New Heavenly Blue were all the accepted. Oh my God.
But then they dropped out,
They were dropouts.
Then they dropped out, and you know what I mean? And then so what happened was, I finished my first year at Michigan. I did really well, but it was kind of, it was arts. It was very artsy. The residential college was a small college within the greater university.
Yeah.
And it focused, the focus was on language and literature and the arts. And they had a writing program and this and that and the other. But I said, what am I going to do with this? So anyway, I went home. I had a really horrible summer job. I won't get into what it was. It was just really horrible and degrading. And also I was taking out, I was going to take out student loan, which is nothing compared to what the kids are in debt with today, but still, It was like a debt I was going to accumulate. And so some friends of mine that I had been playing with in high school, because of Ken Nordine's connections in the show business, we played at all the top venues in Chicago, like opening up with the biggest bands. We opened up for Mountain and 10 Years After and Steppenwolf. We played all the biggest rooms in New York. We played the orchestra hall. You know, we were working on a high level professionally. And then I went to college, and so after I had that summer job, and these friends of mine, they had gotten a record deal down in Georgia with Capricorn Records, which was the label of the Allman Brothers.
Yeah.
So they said, "Hey man, we got this record deal. We want you to come down and you know, we're going to rehearse and we're going to cut a record." And so I'm like, I'm there, you know. And I told my dad, I listened. I got this offer, you know. Yeah, but what about? I said, well, I'll figure it out. He says, well, then go ahead. You know, I mean, I don't think he was that pleased, but he could see how unhappy I was in that summer job. So we went down there, and it turned out to be, I mean, I met a lot of cool people. I met the Allman Brothers. We hung out. I jammed with them a little bit. I met different musicians that were on the Capricorn label. I learned what it was like to live in the deep South.
Yeah.
As a person of color. I mean, you know, it was pretty intense.
Yeah.
But we weren't working and we weren't making any money. We did cut a record, but it, you know, it was a really tough time. And so
then
so I came back to Ann Arbor.
Yeah.
And you know, I was rooming with some guys that I knew from college from there. And then, you know, I met rapidly. I don't know how I met them exactly. I met the guys in New Heavenly Blue.
Yeah.
And they already had a drummer. But they weren't that happy with him. And so, but we had two drummers for a while. Because a lot of bands had two drummers. You know, the Grateful Dead had two drummers. Zappa had two drummers. The Allman Brothers had two drummers. So we tried to make that work for a while. And they had a deal with Atlantic Records. And we were doing, you know, through Dave Brubeck's connections, Chris Brubeck's father.
Yeah.
We started doing concerts and doing gigs, and we played in New York, and we did a record. And you know, I recorded with Dave, and you know, Dave sat in with New Heavenly Blue. They made a record, Two Generations of Brubeck. So this was my first big time recording, you know, in a New York studio, Atlantic Records in New York. And I guess I was about 23, 22. And then that band broke up. And Chris was touring with his father with the Two Generations of Brubeck and some other stuff. And then around that time, because I was living on the north side of Ann Arbor. And then around that time, I was friends with Richard Rupert.
Yeah.
You know, and Tony Kurt and all those people and you and then I met you know, that was the house on Dewey Street happened.
Yep.
But before that, he had the house on Coke Street.
Yep. Good,
you know?
memory.
And that's how I fell in with that clique. Well, you know, my son went to University of Michigan, so many years later, I went back to all these places, you know, to locate them.
I go back every year for the film festival. But Richie, that was a good history. I appreciate that. Let's fast forward. So then you have this huge career with Spyro Gyra, you go to the Brecker Brothers. You're like star of the super funkiest era of the Brecker Brothers. You're playing with Al Di Meola now. But there are periods where I see you play with your trio and you play with your quartet. And then you have a 20-year teaching career or more. When you're writing a composition, I'm curious your take on this question. A screenwriting teacher told me great art or great music is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process when you're writing a Richie Morales song, a composition by Richie?
Well, being a rhythm section player, you know, my most of my compositions would start with a groove, a bass line, a beat, and then I would flesh it out harmonically. After, teaching music and studying music, I might come up with a chordal idea. I might work more melodically, but most recently, I mean, on my website, there's some of my compositions where I played, all the instruments except for a saxophone, or my son played guitar on some. I played guitar. But what happened, I didn't write for a really long time. But then because of the lockdown, well, let me go back further. When I went back to graduate school, I studied studio technology and studio composition. So I learned something about sequencing, using a computer to sequence music.
I see.
So I learned something about that. And so fast forward like many years, and we have the technology where it is today. Due to the lockdown, nobody could play it. Nobody could play together. You couldn't have jam sessions. You couldn't go out. We were really just locked down, afraid to go out of the house. So for a modest investment, I could buy the technology to microphones, interfaces, so on and so forth. And the first thing I did naturally was like record myself playing drums. And I'm playing and I'm soloing and I got a groove going. Well, this is interesting. This has kind of a flow to it. Let me put a bass part on, or let me put a chord cushion or a synth pad over it. But basically, I was just testing the software.
Right.
I was just testing the software, and I was learning how to work the interface and the platform. But I came up with some sketches that, this doesn't sound bad. So I kept working on it, and I called a couple of friends, and people were so starved for human contact and activity that they did me favors, and a lot of people did this. I did people favors.
Yeah.
People call you. I got a track to. Would you mind? Would you be interested in playing on it? I mean, some stuff I got paid for, but other stuff, we exchanged. It was like a bartering of services.
Yeah.
And so that's how some of my compositions, more recently happened that way.
So Richie, when you Duchamp said there's no art without an audience, when you're writing a composition like that, when you're that beautiful morphing process you just described, how much are you thinking of your listener? Does the audience play a role in your creative process?
Well, when I wrote for in Spyro Gyra, Jay Beckenstein encouraged everybody in the band to write songs.
Yeah.
So in that instance, that was a band that was known for the title. I mean, at first they were called Jazz Fusion, but then after that, it was the term smooth jazz was invented.
Yeah.
So it had to be within a certain genre stylistically for him
Yeah.
to consider it. But I wrote 2 or 3 songs that he recorded during that time, and I had to think of it in terms of performance. And since being the drummer, the more than likely it was going to be a drum feature. Probably was going to get a drum solo, in the terms of the show, because we were working so much. So in that instance, I was definitely thinking, it had to have a certain groove. It had to have, there were certain parameters that I was working within. Later, I write some stuff, and I'm playing more jazz, free form, not a mixture of jazz, acoustic jazz, and electric instruments, a lot. And we're playing small clubs, so it was more of a jazz kind of a thing. It was more a vehicle for improvisation, and maybe a little of the jazz flavor in there. But there's one tune on my website it's avant-garde. I mean, it's it's free.
Yeah.
It sounds like sounds like Sonny Chirac or something. It's
Dude, you're talking my Sonny Chirac's album "Sees the Rainbow" is one of my top 5 favorite albums of all time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I love what Sonny did. We were listening to Jack Johnson in Ann Arbor, and we didn't know Sonny played that guitar solo. It was uncredited. We thought it was we thought it was Herbie doing something weird on his synth. And then
or thought it was McLaughlin because he got all the credit.
Right. But anyways, on to music. This is really good. My friend says that the 3 T's of music are taste, technique, and theory. They sort of correspond with Dave Liedman's, because Dave says it's hand, head, and heart. So head could be theory. Technique could be hand. Taste. How does one acquire taste?
Well, it's like, well, how do you develop a discerning palate? With how do you learn the difference between bad wine and good wine? Or you could eat cheeseburgers your whole life, or you could become you live in California where the whole foodie thing started, really, in a way. So you have to be, you have to develop, you have to try things, be willing to taste different things. I mean, you could study you can study it in a book. Jazz was not codified. Jazz was around a long time before it was codified and put in a book and taught in institutes of higher learning.
Yeah. Well, we're going to get into that because you've taught for a while. But one more question on taste. McLuhan says that song is slowed down speech. The reason cultures have different musical taste is ultimately connected to language difference. Any comment? And I can read it again if you want.
Well, certain languages sound more musical than others. Certain like Japanese is not that it's an easy language to learn, but there's certain phrases that you can learn pretty easily, because it's phonetic, the way you pronounce the words, as opposed to, say, English is part of the Germanic family of languages, but German and Dutch and very guttural, different. They use different parts of the palate, and German can sound very musical.
Yep.
It can sound it, but the it's not what you don't think of German as the language of romance.
Yeah.
Musicians, because of we hear phrases and we hear tonality and we hear notes and so forth. Supposedly, musicians have a quick ear
Yeah.
for learning language. Like you learn, but anyone who travels can pick that up. You learn restaurant language. You learn how to order, from a menu. And you may be butchering the language, but if people see that you're trying to make an effort to speak their language, they're liable to be more helpful.
Yeah.
So what was
Richie,
it? Music
well,
is slowed down speech. Is that what he said?
well, he's saying song is slow down speech. The reason cultures have different musical tastes is ultimately connected to language difference. So, I mean, I think you covered it pretty well. I'm curious because you brought up the word learning, and you did have this career where you've taught for so many years at SUNY, and I'm curious. The two other things we didn't get into just quickly is what did you learn from teaching for 20 years? I mean, it must have been satisfying. What was the main sort of epiphany you got out of that? And what did you learn from pursuing martial arts? What's the two sort of takeaways you got in those two career shifts from just being a drummer and a percussionist and a musician?
Well, in martial arts, there's well, I don't know if it's only martial arts. It's a lot of things, but there's a phrase: with knowledge comes responsibility. And in martial arts, the responsibility, the more you learn, part of it is that you have to teach the people behind you. And as a way of learning, when you learn different techniques, you have to recite or perform your different techniques, or if it's a kata-based art form, a kata being these different forms that you have to memorize, or if it's purely like a combat self-defense system, you have to learn these techniques, display the technique, and explain why you're doing what you're doing. And that's how you get promoted.
Yeah.
So the word sensei, people think it means master or teacher, or it's an honorific, or in Chinese it's sifu, or in Filipino, it's guru, which is a derivation of guru.
Yeah.
But it really, literally in Japanese, sensei, it means one who has gone before.
Yeah.
So you become, after you've been doing it for a few years, you become a helper.
Yeah.
A senpai. For lack of a better word, let's say you become a teaching assistant.
Yeah.
And then as you progress, there are different levels of that. And then, if you get your black belt, that means you finished your high school curriculum. And then you have your different degrees of a black belt. And the highest degrees are, you finished high school. So first, second, third, whatever. Fourth degree, okay, you finish college. Fifth through, I don't know, eighth Dan, I don't know. At the end, you're like a professor.
Yeah.
So that's basically how I got into education, because I mean, that's basically how I got into teaching, because I was getting my master's degree, and it was like, okay, well, now you have to do a lecture demonstration, and you have to get some, you have to talk about Sonny Rollins' saxophone duo on, um, you know, uh, that one that he played with. I can't think now. The duel that he had with Coltrane.
Yeah.
Uh,
I don't know what it is, but we can look it up. That's
anyway,
amazing.
saxophone Colossus.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
a lecture of anything. So, and then also you get a taste for giving some lessons, get some teaching experience.
Yeah.
So, I had a department head he says, you're not bad at this. And so, and the jazz program at Purchase College was in its infancy. And I had my performance resume was at least as good, if not better, than most of the faculty in the jazz department at
Yep.
the time. At the time,
Yeah.
So that's how I got on board as a teaching, as a teacher. As word got out about the program, all these top professionals from the business, came, and it became a very well respected program. I think it's in its 28th year, maybe. And also I had a knack for programming, so I had a knack for what I was doing. It's like in the military, if they see you have an aptitude for something, you get promoted. You become a squad leader, you become a non-commissioned officer. If you distinguish yourself in the field, or somehow you have some kind of knowledge, you didn't go to West Point, well, maybe they steer you towards a certain classes so you could get a commission, you could become an officer, and so on and so forth. So education, it's pretty much, at least at the college level, and especially nowadays when the adjunct professors are doing the lion's share of the teaching, because it's cheaper for the universities to use adjuncts than it is to hire full-time professors, PhDs, who they have to give tenure to, and then they're committed to them and paying them millions of dollars over the course of a career. They can do it a lot cheaper with adjunct faculty.
Right.
So that's what I was. I was an adjunct, but I had title without tenure, because I'd been doing it for so long,
Well,
but
Richie, it's interesting because Valdez, one of your heroes, I read that he said, we're all students, and not to have that, like, I'm the master. And that's interesting, because that's the same thing I always do. I've studied this stuff for 30, 40 years, but I still, like McLuhan says, I'm still a student of it. But, this
always be the eternal student, right?
The eternal student. It's a great attitude. But, Ben Radliff, he just put out a book about Bill Frisell, and he has this line. It goes, I mean sound as its long function among jazz players, as a mystical term of art, as in every musician finally needs a sound, a full and sensible embodiment of their artistic personality, such that it can be heard at best in a single note. So he would say, like me and you, we could hear Miles, and Ben would say, that's fragile and pointed. Train is slightly undercooked and urgent. If a music writer that you respect was going to describe Richie's sound in a couple words, what words would you feel he got it? That it captures your full and sensible embodiment of your artistic personality?
Well, taste, groove, um, expressive.
Yeah,
Those are words I'd like to hear. You know,
that's good.
I
Monk,
mean, I've played with a lot of fusion bands, high energy fusion bands. So
yeah,
like people, you know, they think of me as that.
yeah.
You know, but I've played in other instances where it was more playing for the song, you know, and playing very delicately. And I just finished a year with Al Di Meola. I wasn't even playing drum set. I was playing cajon and hand percussion. I didn't hardly use drumsticks the whole tour.
I heard some of that. It was outstanding. It was with the tabla player and you and him mainly on acoustic, right?
Yeah, yeah, he's playing acoustic now. Yeah, but
Amazing. That was,
near the end of the tour, he broke out. He broke out the Les Paul, the electric.
yeah.
You know.
Well, you touched on what you must have ESP because you touched on the next question. Is Thelonious Monk said there are no wrong notes. Any comment?
Well, from a technical standpoint, there's also another in jazz. You're only half a note away. You know, if you know if you use chromaticism, you can turn a mistake into not a mistake. Or they say if you do make a mistake, play it again.
Yeah.
You know, there's that famous. There's a clip of Herbie talking about one night he's playing with Miles,
Yeah.
and he really played a clam, and you could see it in the video. Like Miles is playing, and he takes his mouth, the horn out of his mouth, and he just goes like, and he thinks for a couple of seconds, and then he takes what Herbie plays, and he makes it into something.
It's an amazing thing. He used that in a lecture too. And in fact, talking about Miles talked about the space between notes. You know, George Clinton says funk is the absence of. How do you navigate silence and not overplaying? How do you
It's
do
not it's not easy.
that?
No, because we're in a time, and it's part of the development of music in all genres, classical music, jazz, rock, fusion, whatever you want to call it, where each generation bypasses or develops the technical ability well beyond the generation that came before it. I mean, they're classical. Nobody plays like Art Tatum.
Yeah.
You know, or but
Well, Domi's getting close. Domi's like a cross between Art, Stevie Wonder, and Joe Zawinul.
yeah, I'm not sure if I know her. Who's
Anyways, Chet, it is refreshing when someone almost gets to that Art Tatum level, because I think that's why I love on your website that you say earthling. And I was wondering if it's like, are you implying, you know, your website is very unique with that word, that you're an earthling. And are you implying that like Art Tatum might not have been an earthling? Like if we listened to him, I mean, like, how did that happen and where'd you get that? But let's go on these two people that I'm very curious if you could comment briefly. One is Tony Williams. I know you've mentioned him as an influencer, someone you've listened to. Tony says, if I could live my life as well as I play drums, I'd be well off. Just, it's a great comment. Just summarize just briefly, what did you get from Tony in that, you know, Harold Bloom, Anxiety of Influences says, absorb your main hero, your main influence, your main mentor, and then abandon it. What's the main thing you got from Tony, you think? And how is it that you can abandon it? Is that possible?
Well, I think that's a thing of that's like what Charlie Parker said: master your instrument, practice, master your instrument, learn all the theory, get as good as you can get, and then basically forget all that shit and just play your ass off.
But how do you do that? Like, first of all, what did you get from Tony? Like one little.
Well, there was energy,
yeah,
splashes of color.
Yeah.
He wasn't keeping time in the traditional sense. He
Yeah.
was counter. He was playing. He was creating a sonic environment within which this is what drummers in jazz have to do. They have to create an ambiance with their time feel and their use of color,
Yeah.
and to create a comfortable environment so that other people can create.
Yes.
And Tony took it beyond that, where there were other drummers before him that did it, where it was the drums were a frontline instrument. They were in your face.
Yeah.
He was the foil, he was Miles's foil.
Wow.
And the thing is, when he came on the scene, he was 17 years old, and he was playing with that exuberance, that over exuberance that kids have.
Yeah.
But he was his father took him around to all the joints in as a child in Boston. And that happened a lot too. Dennis Chambers is another one. His father took him around. He was playing in the joints when he was like 9 years old. It happened. It's happened a lot. Terry Lynn Carrington. I mean, I always say I got a late start. I didn't start playing till I was 10 or 11. Some of these guys
a late start.
But, a lot of these kids started to, Peter Erskine, he started when he was 6.
Did he?
Mozart was composing when he was 4.
Yeah.
So it's just the amount of time that of course there's the presumption of talent.
Yeah.
But there's the amount of time that you have put on the instrument. Now there are other things that come into play, whether you're like socially inept, whether nobody can stand you, if all that kind of stuff. If you get past all that, maybe you got a shot. Yeah, Tony, and being that he was of a younger generation, he was a child of the 60s. He liked rock and roll, so he brought the rock and roll energy to jazz.
Yeah.
And
sure did. And that first thing with Larry Young, we listened to that at Dewey Street. Larry Young and Tony and McLaughlin, that shit blew us out. So let's touch on another person. By the way, I have to tell you this great line I learned from this drummer. He said, you can brush me, you can stick me up and brush me off, because I learned that the reason brushes lost their subtlety in jazz drumming is because the bass got amplified. So the drummers had to hit harder. So I appreciate the fact that, you've always been well-versed in brushes as well. But the guy I'm really interested that you played with also my friend was his assistant for like over 2 decades. His name is George Russell. And in 53, the year I was born, he came up with the Lydian chromatic concept of tonal organization.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like you played this session, or you played with him. And I was wondering just briefly if you can explain in layperson's term. They say his concept establishes gravity as the driving force in music, and it grasps the behavior of all musical activity: melody, harmony, rhythm, and form. So what did you learn from playing with George, and how was that?
Well, it was a great experience. The drummer who had been working with him for many years had a professional conflict, and so he did me a favor, and he gave me he recorded the whole repertoire on CD, and he gave it to me with notes. So I listened to the music, and so I was well prepared for the audition. and because they were scared. You know, they didn't know how this was going to happen, how this was going to be, how this was going to work out. And now I can't really describe. There are people that think George's book is a how can I say it? They don't give it much
Cred, yeah.
they don't give it much credit. They think it's kind of a
It's like Ornette, same thing. When Ornette calls his music, you know, whatever he calls his harmonics.
yeah. Well, no, George's the Lydian chromatic concept. It uses I forget which scale, but
Yeah.
it's a particular scale as the basis of all music, you know. And I go back to those records that he made early in his career, and he's you know writing contrafacts over you know existing song. He's writing different melodies or different arrangements using his harmonic theories. You know, and Bill Evans is on the record, and he was a drummer first.
Yeah.
He was a drummer first, and then I guess he heard Max Roach, and he said, "Well, you know, I can't." There went that. But also, he suffered from poor health, so he was in a sanitarium, you know, trying to recover from tuberculosis or something or other. And they had a piano in one of the rooms, and so he said he would just sit at the piano and he would hit notes, and he would hear the overtones, and that's how he came up with the theory. Now he made additions. I forget how many editions of the Lydian, of the concept, as he called it.
Yeah.
I don't know how many editions of that book there are. 3. There are at least 3, maybe more. But quite honestly, because of my experience with the Brecker brothers and with a lot of other people who were, you know, Randy Brecker and Randy in particular, a lot of his compositions, they're based on, you know, he's very influenced by Monk, by Mingus.
Yeah.
And he's using, but he's putting it and mixing that with bebop and mixing it with rock and fusion, and also the funk and the gospel that he learned playing with. They both played, but Randy first, and they playing with Horace Silver.
Yep.
So he took all that knowledge and put it in a contemporary concept, and he came up with something fresh. So.
Well, it's interesting, Richie, because that's, you know, all these questions I asked you, I was fortunate enough to ask Horace Silver at one time. But my friend who worked for George Russell, Greg Ramsey, for 20, 30 years, he said there's a great story where Miles and George are sitting at the piano, and George would go, check this chord out. And you go, dong. And then Miles would go, that's nothing. Check this chord out. Ding. And then it would just like trade these random chord, you know, phrases. And you can just see, it reminded me of you saying, you know, he's sitting in this hospital recovering and he's just hitting these notes going, whoa, and going into the overtone. So tell me one major element in the years you've been doing your creativeness that's changed in one major element that stayed the same.
Well, the road never changes.
Yeah.
The difficulties of trying to get to the gig and what you have to go through to for that 90 minutes or 2 hours that you spend on stage in the actual performance, all the dues you pay getting up to that hasn't changed. And as I've gotten older, it's harder.
Yeah.
And also what has changed is that the clubs, I've been around long enough, I've seen any number of institutions where these were clubs where you know, if you wanted to make it in New York, you had to be seen at these venues. And I've seen a couple of them come and go.
Yeah.
And most recently, the 55 bar closed.
Yeah.
Its most recent ownership was the last 20 years, but I started playing there in 1984.
Yeah.
And it was a, you know, so yeah,
Well, what's one major thing that stayed the same in these, you know,
well,
6 decades you played? What's one thing you could say has remained the same for you?
well, I don't know. You know, it's, you gotta love it. You gotta
No.
love it. What's changed? I don't know what's. It's just it. I like getting together and playing with people. You know, the scene in New York is it's a little bit more insular than it used to be, and the focus is more on you know, jazz. It's more bebop oriented um, than at any time uh, that I remember. You know, when I came on the scene in the 70s and 80s. Well, in the late 80s, I was mostly out of town, so I was on tour. But late 70s, early 80s, there were all these different clubs, but there was a certain eclecticism that was, you know, you could go hear really good Latin music. You could hear straight ahead jazz. You could hear avant-garde music. You could hear rock and blues. Anything. It was a potpourri. But then after a while, and it was due to a certain, it was due to gentrification. People didn't want loud music in their neighborhoods. Um, uh, Wynton Marsalis kind of changed the whole thing. He did a lot for jazz, but all of a sudden it came back. Everybody had to wear a suit and play acoustic jazz, and the scene changed. That's what happens. Changes, but they say the more things change, the more things stay the same. You know.
Yeah.
And there's an overabundance. There's so many students coming out of music school now. There's so many musicians who are willing to work for free, and they undercut. They bring everybody's level down. Of now, for people in the plastic arts, that, you know, sculptors and painters and writers, and that's no news. They know there's no money in it. They have to get patrons. They have to get they have to get grants.
Yep.
They have to get subsidized somehow.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, Richie, tell me this. Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength, rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
Well, I just became a better musician. You know, that's what we try to do. We try to patch the holes. I like sports analogies. You know, baseball players have weaknesses. They have holes in their strike zone.
Yeah.
You know, and the pitcher exploits those holes. And the best hitters don't have any holes in their strike zone. So you spend your life as a musician trying to patch your weaknesses, whether it's, you know, learning. When I first started to play, I was, you know, I just played with a lot of energy, and I knew how to rush. You know, my timekeeping was weak. So that's a cardinal sin for drummers. But, you know, like I don't know who came up with the thing. So many drummers, so little time. But no, so I worked on that, on the timekeeping, and I was always a groove-oriented player. But a lot of a lot of my role models were very edgy players. Tony
Yeah.
Williams, Lenny White, Billy Cobham. They play way on top of the beat. So, you know, when you're the leader, if the drummer's a leader of the band, the drummer can do anything.
Yeah.
You know, Art Blakey played loud. He played like a rock drummer.
Yeah.
So, you know, I just developed my skills and playing dynamically, just trying to be as a person, maturing, just trying to be, I was very fiery, you know, easy to, no, I won't say confrontational, but I just, you know, somebody said something to me, I'd respond like really quickly, you know.
Yeah.
But so I just learned, you know, to let things pass. You know, you learn how to keep the hardest and most valuable skill that people have to learn is how to keep their mouth shut.
Yeah. Good. Well, Richie, just a few more and we're out of here. I really appreciate your time. How do you find peace of mind?
Well, I practice. I'm fortunate that I live in a semi-rural area. I live near a county park and a state park, and so I'm able to go for walks in the woods.
No.
And we have a lot of wildlife around here, and
Very good. Richie, if you were
Faulkner. I've
walking.
been reading Faulkner lately.
Oh, nice.
That was an experience. I didn't really know what he was about.
Beautiful.
You know.
So, if you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
Geez, I don't know. Buckle up, I would say.
Buckle up.
It's like you have no idea what life has in store.
Yeah, it's good. When I asked Dr. John all these questions, that was the only one he wouldn't answer. He goes, I won't go there.
Yeah.
So a couple more, we're out of here. But this is like a little 5-question quiz from Alan Watts. Just in a couple words. First one, who started it all?
The Big Bang. I don't know if that's a who.
That's a good one. I got to tell you this. When Captain Beefheart and Frank Zappa were both in their older, or just before they died, they started talking, and they had just watched a PBS documentary on the Big Bang theory. And Frank asked Don, he says, what came before the Big Bang? And Don went, the big. Okay, the second Alan Watts is, are we going to make it?
I don't know.
Where do we put it?
I got to pass on that one.
Fourth is, who's cleaning it up?
I don't think anybody cleans anything up.
Fifth one, is it serious?
Yeah.
Beautiful. Couple more and we're out of here, Richie. I appreciate this. What's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
I don't know. I don't know. Things that have inspired me are things that have been around for like a long time. You know, today specifically, I don't know. Well, the technology has enabled me to realize some of my creative ideas, so I'm thankful for that. But it also, anybody can be a composer now.
Yeah.
Anybody. So that the music has suffered as a result.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because Thornton Wilder said in 1928, the playwright for Our Town, he said, art is confession, art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. You've laid your cards on the table for 90 minutes. I'm really grateful. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this. But Richie, what's it really all about for you?
What's it been about? I mean, in terms of performing and playing and being a professional and trying to play some creative music and coming away from the different professional situations with a measure of satisfaction and self-respect.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. And what gives you the most optimism?
When things turn out right. I mean, every now and then things go my way, or if I think things go the right way for somebody I care about.
Yeah.
You know, because as I said earlier, there's so much. Life is hard. Life is indifferent. It just goes on. You know, it's all these things going on, happening to people. You know, happening to our planet, our society. You know, politically. And the media, you know, it reinforces the negative. That's their bread and butter.
Yeah. Well, I think early on when like all the power to you, because that is an addicting way to control people, TV and news. But I was really impressed where you said in the beginning, what's the best thing for a human being is having something in life that's like peace and serenity. Because the first question I got from Wilhelm Reich says the best thing for a human being is another human being. And the last question I got is what they asked Groucho Marx at the end of his life. They go, what gives you the most optimism? And he said, other people.
Huh.
So I got to tell you, it's been a pleasure spending this time with you, Richie. And I hope we can get together in person someday. If you're ever out here, please let me know. And I'll show you our great beach town, Venice. And I hope to see you play live again. But it's been this really special time spending this time, you know, being able to just converse. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you, Jerry. It's great to see you.
I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, but I hope this never ends. It keeps going on forever and ever.
All right. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.